Hi, I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan. Welcome to Long Lost Friends. Today we are delighted to have Allen Steele joining us. Allen is a prolific, multi-award winning and nominated author who has written novels, novellas, short stories, essays, and a lot of other things. Just to highlight a few of his honors, he's won several Hugo Awards and been nominated for many more. He's won 2 Locus and Scion Awards. He could punch a frequent flyer card for being the recipient of a bunch of Reader Choice Awards, including at least 3 from Asimov's. And he has been a finalist for just about every other award out there. Be sure to check out his website to learn more about him and find links to his work. Allen has also testified before the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics of the U.S. House of Representatives in hearings about space exploration in the 21st century. And very cool, he has a story included on the disc aboard NASA's Phoenix lander, which landed on Mars in 2008. Welcome, Allen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we have so many questions to ask, but first, would you like to tell us about what you're working on now?
Oh, wait. Don't forget.
I forgot. Show us your pets.
If you have a pet nearby, I know you had a dog nearby a minute ago.
Okay, good. Hey guys, okay, you want me to introduce Jack? Okay, yeah. Jack, you're on. Come on up here. Come on. Hop up. Oh, he's getting older. You're getting old and heavy. This is my collaborator. His name Jack Steele. He's a Jack Russell mix. So named because he's from Jackson, Tennessee, where an old girlfriend of mine used to live. Carolyn, if you're out there, hi. And he's been my companion and sometimes, oh yeah, hi there, yeah, and collaborator. And he stays with me during the day when I write books, and then at night he curls up with me when I read. And keeps me company. And one thing that was really great about him is that some years ago, I always brag about him. Some years ago, I was very ill and housebound for a while, and he really was constantly with me the entire time, and he really pulled me through that. So this is my bone, but definitely aside from my wife, my best friend.
Adorable. I'm so glad we got to meet him.
Yeah. Okay, now get down now. Okay, you can get down. Okay. He's also getting quite heavy. He used to be.
How old is he?
He's 12.
Okay.
He's 12, and he's getting to be. I feed him too much. He's really good at scarfing it, and everybody else does. We go to bookstores together.
Nice.
He's a great bookstore dog and comic book store dog, and everywhere he goes, people have boxes of cookies for him. And so I think he eats a third meal every day from just that alone. I mean, we can make the rounds. And it's like every place he goes to, he gets a couple of cookies. He's great at doing the "I'm so starving, please help me" bit. So.
Well, and it's so easy to lose track because I've got dogs with the cookies. You think, oh, they're just getting a couple of cookies, but it's like half a cup of food or another cup of food, you know?
It is. But you can't turn them down, and I can't turn them down. Besides that, and table scraps and leftovers and everything else. So he's a bit on the chubby side now.
Wow, who can resist those eyes?
Oh yes, that's the other thing about it. You can't say no to those eyes. No. And he's going to sit down here and listen to us and keep
awesome
company. So, current projects. I haven't had, with when you're prolific as a writer, you go through periods when you have nothing comes out, and people think, oh, you quit writing or you're blocked or whatever. And no, sometimes being the most prolific is just taking a while for stuff to get out there. So I haven't published anything actually in about 2 years, but that doesn't mean I've been fallow. I've actually got quite a few things that have been going on. Just in January, I finished I think the longest book that I've written since my very first book, a major novel called Capricorn, and it's kind of a fusion between hard SF and espionage. It's kind of a hard SF slash spy adventure. The way I describe it to people is if, say, Donald Westlake uh, and Robert Heinlein had decided to collaborate, this is what you would have gotten. Or if Poul Anderson and Lynn Deaton had collaborated, this is what you would have gotten. It's a kind of an experimental book. It's also rather tongue-in-cheek to add on to it. It doesn't take itself entirely too seriously. It starts off reading like an espionage novel, and then about 1/3 of the way in, it suddenly becomes a science fiction book. So I describe it as being like Neapolitan ice cream, you know, where you a half and half ice cream, where you start off and it's vanilla, and then all of a sudden it turns into a chocolate bar. This is what this does. So it's at one of my publishers now, and he's reading it, and I guess it'll be out, oh, if I'm lucky, late this year, or at least by sometime next year. And I'm on pins and needles about that. So anyway, I finished that up, and while I was on taking a break on that, I worked on my next Captain Future novel. For the last several years, I revived uh, Edmund Hamilton's classic space opera hero, Captain Future. If anybody's not familiar with him, he was the one of the very first space opera heroes of the 1940s.
Wow.
In fact, this is issue number 1 from 1939. No,
Oh,
that's
that's
not a reproduction. That's the real.
oh,
And
don't hurt it.
there we go. This valuable artifact that I nearly dropped it. But this is a copy of issue number 1,
Wow.
and I revived it some years ago. And it first is a hardcover. That was, in fact, well, Tor Books published the original one, and this came out in 2017. And then, unfortunately, David Hartwell, who was my editor, passed away, and they didn't want it. The next editor was not supportive and did not want the next 2 books, and so they went to small press. And so over the last several years, I've been doing it. I decided to try with the guys at Amazing Science Fiction. We decided to see if we could try something and do it as kind of bring back a kind of an ebook pulp. We call them e-pulps. So they've been published in. So we've been publishing in about one. It was supposed to be originally quarterly, but now it's sort of gone to about annual publication. But we've been doing new installments, and we've published. This was the last issue, and this was issue number 4, and this continued and concluded the trilogy. Oh, actually, no, this is not this is issue number 2. I'm sorry, issue number. Here was the conclusion of the trilogy. This is issue number 4, and I thought that I was going to be finishing it up, but it's turned out to be much more popular than we expected it to be, and people kept saying we want more, and I wanted to continue this thing. So the first it's going to be followed by a 2-part story, and the next issue, which will be the first story, is going to be called Lost Apollo. It will be coming out sometime later this year. Here is the black and white of the cover art. I'm really proud of this. I'll tell you who it's by in a second. Hopefully you can see this clearly.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is by Michael Kaluta, who is one of the great comics artists, DC and Marvel comics artists of the 70s and 80s. He did The Shadow. He did a long space opera series called, uh, I want to say Starburst, but that's not it. Um, Star Reach, I think. And this is his depiction of Captain Future and the Futureman. This is the black and white. He's working on the color illustration now. I was incredibly lucky to have him to do the cover. So this is a preview of the cover for the thing.
That's exciting.
So
Beautiful.
that's the second project. The third project has been I'm now working on my first book length nonfiction book, and it's called Pulp Justice, and it's a history of pulp magazine heroes through the 20th century, crime fighters. So it begins in the turn of the last century with the original Nick Carter detective series. It goes through the 30s with the Shadow and Doc Savage and the Spider. Goes into the 50s with the detective characters like Mike Shane and Mike Hammer, others. Into the 60s with the spy craze. And then goes into the 70s with the men's adventure series like The Executioner, The Destroyer, and so forth. And then goes up into the present time with what I call the hardcover pulps. The characters like Clyde Cussler with Dirk Pitt, and Lee Child with Jack Reacher, and so forth. And I'm tracing the development of these characters and how they influenced each other over time, and how they also influenced a lot of the comics characters in science fiction that came along. It's very surprising to see where the roots of some of modern characters that everybody recognizes, that you can see them traced back to the pulps. For instance, everybody's familiar, all science fiction fans are familiar with on Star Trek, Mr. Spock's Vulcan nerve pinch, where he comes and knocks somebody out by doing that. Well, that first appeared in Doc Savage. Doc Savage first did that. Everybody knows, of course, that Clark Kent's secret identity is Superman, or Superman's secret identity is Clark Kent. That's an amalgam between Doc Savage's real name was Clark Savage Jr. The Shadow's real name was Kent Allard, Clark Kent. There was all these influences that go all the way along. Stan Lee was very open in the fact that he was inspired when he did Spider-Man, that he was influenced by the Spider. So this book traces all of this. It's a personal fascination that I have with the pulps, and I'm finally getting to do something with it. So it's coming out. We've just sold. My collaborator is Ron Miller, who is he's the art curator on the project, and he also contributed the chapter on 50s detectives. And a major, we haven't signed ink contracts yet, but it has been sold to a major university press. And so I'm working on that now. And then finally, and it's just that is not enough. I've begun work. I'm now also working on a new novel. I'm working on a new just straight out science fiction novel called Lemuria 7. Last year, I had a story published in Asimov Science Fiction called Lemuria 7 is Missing, that is a finalist for the Asimov's Readers Award this year. And I have a good feeling about that, you know what I mean. And my agent has said that he thinks I ought to turn it into a novel. So I'm now working on novelizing it.
Wow.
And if that's not enough, I'm edging for years now. A lot of my best known work has been my Coyote series, my Coyote novels. And for years, people have been bugging me to write a new Coyote book. And I've been saying, no, 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 I'm done. That's over and done with. And that's beginning to go towards, yes. So I've begun giving very serious consideration to writing a new Coyote book.
Well, gosh, you're going to keep people very happy out here.
Well,
Everything
yeah,
coming up for you and
I
Coyote.
just I I love to write. That's
Really?
all I've yes. Uh, well, I'm a very lucky person in life. I When I was a kid, when I was 15 years old, I decided I wanted to be a science fiction writer when I grew up. And I'm one of those guys who got lucky, and I'm getting to do exactly what it is I want to. I grew up to be exactly what I want to be. Not many people get that,
That's
and
true.
so I don't take that for granted. So um, my favorite story of a writer's demise was the late G. Harry Stein, who apparently had, I've been told, had a coronary seizure while he was actually writing a book. And his last act, when he collapsed, was to hit save on his computer, on a computer command before he died. And I look at that and I say, that's what I want to do. That's the way I want to go.
Right, the end
Well, it's
first.
Yeah, that's it. The end. Now, okay, you can
yeah,
take it away now. Finish the story.
so interesting, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk more about this, but kind of looking at your cross-pollination and interest in both comic books and hard science fiction. It's a really interesting blend. So maybe in
Well,
this book.
there's only one regret that I have in my career, and that is I didn't branch out and do comics. I
Not
kind of wish
today.
that I had done that also. And there was a point that about 25 years ago that I was offered an opportunity by a small press outfit to come do comics, and in fact, to do a Coyote comic series. And I didn't take them up on it. I just wasn't into it. And I wish I had done that now. Unfortunately, that opportunity is no longer there. So, I don't have very many regrets, but that's one of them. I kind of wish I had done. I've always been a comics fan, and I kind of wished I had done that too. But there it goes. I'm at a place where I think I'm a little too old to start a new career now. Although if there's somebody who wants to
Never
give
know.
it a try, I mean,
Yeah,
turn it down, you know.
Yeah, it
yeah.
doesn't seem like that would be, it seems like something you could do.
Well, it's harder. I talked to my agent about this, and he said that it's actually harder to break into than you think. I mean, it's one of these things you can't just suddenly, even if you're an established prose writer, you can't just suddenly say, "Okay, I want to write comics now." About as difficult to break into comics as it is to break into writing science fiction in the first place. And somebody just doesn't come out of nowhere and offer you a job at a comics company. So it would be something that I would literally have to spend a lot of time and attention pursuing. And as I just said, I've got a lot of other things going on right
You're a
now.
little busy.
Yeah.
Alan, where would someone do you have a list that you have people sign up for, or where would someone find out when your newest releases are coming out without, I mean,
I I talk about it on my Facebook page. Uh,
okay.
I have I've got probably the world's most unused website. I mean, it hasn't been updated in like 10 years. It's ridiculous. I'm just not a web person. I'm just not. But I do maintain a Facebook page.
Oh, good.
And I do drop in every now and then when I've got something coming out or I've got something due out or something of that nature. I do go on my Facebook page and I talk about it. So if you go
Okay.
to Allen Steele SF Writer, I believe is the name of it.
Okay.
Else, somebody
We'll
else
stick
made
a
it
link.
for me.
We'll stick a
Yeah.
link below. We'll find it. Stick a link below. Do you happen to do formerly known as Twitter X at all or Blue Sky?
I've been staying. I
Clear?
I stay. I keep social media kind of at an arm's length. Uh, I learned very early on when I got my first computer that I can get hooked on that stuff very easily. And I'd spend all my time instead of writing, hanging out on AOL chat rooms. I mean, I was one of the first, I got AOL when it was new, when AOL was new. And I started hanging around there. And my third novel took twice as long as it should have taken to write because every time I got stalled on something, I'm going to go over and hang out in the Other Worlds Cafe. I was uh, one of the guys who hung out there, and that was one of the original science fiction chat rooms, and I was one of the regulars there. And it got to be a very addictive thing, and I finally realized, no, this is not good for me. This is way too addictive. So I deliberately keep all those things at arm's length so that I'm not, otherwise, I would be doing that when I should be writing. And I honestly think this is one of the reasons why I've been prolific and one of the reasons why I've written and published as much as because I've now published. Oh, we counted the other day. Actually, my wife and I came to the realization that somehow or the other, I've actually managed to publish 35 books. And that's published, not self-published. That's published with everywhere from major publishers down to small press publishing.
It's amazing.
That's and that yeah,
Amazing.
that's 23 novels, and then 23 novels and about 9 or 10 short story collections and several novellas. It's just a lot of books. And and the reason why I've been able to do that is that I've resisted mightily the urge to go hang out in social media and to do all of that. And I mean, and that's one word of advice I give to new writers. If you're going to do this and you got to do it seriously, you got to decide which do you want to do more. Do you want to hang out online and be in social media and have a Facebook page or a blog that you're constantly on, or do you want to write? Because there's very few people who can do both. I mean, I know a couple of people who can, but not everybody is John Scalzi or Chris Rush or people so well disciplined that they can, they can do both of these things and still they can have an active online social life and be prolific. Most people are just not that way. I'm certainly not.
That's
I
good
Uh,
to
have
know
a
yourself.
question about the pulp novels that you've been mentioning. When you're writing a pulp
mhm.
Captain Future, that doesn't really have hard science in it.
Oh, well, not no. My
As but yours
my
do.
my Captain Future is very much hard SF pulp. Uh,
Right, so did you start off with the pulp and say, I'm gonna put hard science in it, or how does that work?
Let me tell you how that worked. I was Captain Future was a character who I read in the original. I read the paperback reprints in the '60s when I was a kid and loved them. But I went and forgot about him for a very long time. And then some years ago, I became ill. I came down with first it was recurring, and then it became chronic pancreatitis. And I got myself hospitalized. I spent a lot of time in hospitals. And when you have this, they put you in a room. They put you in a room, put you in a bed, and you don't get to eat or drink anything for 3 days. I mean, they hook you up with an IV and they dope you up and they keep you like that until the pain goes away. And the pain is tremendous. And I found that I wasn't able to to read complex fiction because I was so doped up on Demerol that the novel that I was, the serious literary novels that I was trying to read, I couldn't. You know, I kept reading the same page over and over and over again, trying to make sense out of it. So I had my Kindle, and I said, you know, I'm going to find something I can absorb easily. I said, Captain Future. I haven't read a Captain Future novel in years, and so I found the first Captain Future story. In fact, it was this one that I just showed you, Captain Future and the Space Emperor, and I downloaded it and began to read it. And I was reading it, and I realized, you know, you could actually take this and update it. You know, and if you took this and updated the character and you updated the background and you got the science right and you set it in our solar system as we know it now, because the Captain Future stories were written in the 1940s. We at that time, all we knew about the solar system was what we could see through a telescope lens. You know, rocketry was no more advanced than the V2 rocket. Nobody even knew about that thing yet. Uh, and I thought if you could take this and update it, and make this a real state of the art science fiction novel, you'd have something. And so that's what I've done here with this particular character, was that you know, with the permission of the Edmund Hamilton estate, I took the character and I updated him to present day science. So it's very diligently that, you know, as with all of my science fiction, I really do my research. And that's one of the things I like about writing science fiction, is that it's a field where you can learn stuff while you're writing it. My
Yeah,
approach is
Alan, this actually segues into a question Elizabeth and I were, because we
sure.
meet ahead of time and chat, and we were wondering, because in reading about you, it doesn't seem that your background is science, like you're not a, you know, engineer or a physicist or something like that. So not being a scientist, where do you go for your science-based information? I mean, you're researching, but you're hard science, so it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, for starters, when I realized early on that I wanted to be a science fiction writer, when I went to college, I took as many science courses as I could. That was for starters, and it drove my advisor crazy because he wanted me to take all the lit classes, and instead I was taking, you know, astronomy and geology and archaeology and everything else I could do. So I got an academic, not just a formal background, but I've got you know, I don't got a science-based degree. My degree is actually in journalism. Um, but even then, I was specialized. Although I was an investigative reporter, I specialized in science stuff. My education was in science journalism. Uh, Fred Pohl, who is one of my influences, used to call it chasing science. He used to, and I describe myself the same way. I'm not a scientist, but I'm kind of a science groupie. You know, I pay attention to this stuff, and the thing that I particularly pay attention to is physics and astronomy. So I've got friends in this in the community, uh, uh, people who I can call up, or sometimes they just drop stuff in my hands they think I might be interested in. When I can, I go to conferences. I read every day. The news. There's several different science blogs and things like that that I go and take a look at, and I'm just sometimes just skimming them real quickly. So I keep up with it. Uh, and this is where I get my backgrounding. I'm going to see if I can tilt the screen here to show you something. Um, there's my desk. You see those piles of paper over here?
Uh-huh.
These are all photocopies of scientific papers that I found online that I've printed out, and these are all waiting. Ditto for this. And so these in that file cabinet, I'm not sure if you can really see that or not, but that file cabinet, the first two drawers are science articles that I have and divided up into different topics, categories, and it's filled with those. And that's the research files. All those books back there, those are science books. So I keep up with it, and that I basically I consider myself to be I'm still kind of a journalist, except instead of writing nonfiction, I'm doing fiction, but it's still kind of the same thing.
So when you are coming up with it, whether it's a story or a novel or a mosaic, do you have the plot, the characters, and then you look for the science that goes into that, or do you read
Yeah.
a science thing and say, "Wow, I got to write about this"?
What happens is I get the first germ of the idea, and then I began to do the background research on this, and from the research, I developed the story. So that kind of goes hand in hand. Idea, brainstorm. Okay, then I figure out what do I got to look at? What areas of science do I have to look at? And so I'll even write down almost like a shopping list. And then I begin researching that and reading up on it and so forth. And out of the research for that, the plot begins to develop. And I know where to go from there. And then as the plot begins to develop, then more story comes together. The approach that I take is that I follow a bit of advice that the late great writer Theodore Sturgeon said. Theodore Sturgeon he even had a button with this. He said, "Ask the next question." And the button in fact, had a Q with an arrow sticking out of it. If you can find, by the way, if you can find the logo for that, you might put that at the bottom of the screen. It's out there. And that's what it meant. That was advice to science fiction writers, and just as a whole. You ask the next question. The first question is, what if? And then when you get to answer that, then you say, okay, and then, and then, and you keep asking questions. What if, and then? What if, and then? And out of that develops your story. So my stories generally, one of the reasons why I began this is talking about all the things that I'm working on. That's because some of those things I'm thinking about well in advance of when I'm actually writing them. I mentioned a new coyote, thinking about writing a new coyote book. What that means is that I'm beginning to think about the stories and the areas that I have to research for that coyote book as I envision it. The book that I'm writing now, the novel that I'm writing now, I'm in communication with a couple of scientists who are feeding me some very interesting information, and I'm pursuing that. So it works together. And as I say, one of the great things about writing, a hard SF over, say, I don't have anything against fantasy or whatever, but fantasy is an unreal world. I mean, fundamentally, I mean, magic isn't real. I mean, that's great. You get good stories, but it's not real. You're never going to learn how to actually ride a dragon. But I have actually sat in a space shuttle simulator and have flown a space shuttle, a simulated space shuttle into orbit. I mean, I've actually had that experience. You can't do that writing fantasy. I've actually, I've done a lot of interesting things in my research. I've learned scuba diving. It wasn't research, but I have had the experience of testifying before Congress, and I've actually put that experience into stories, and it builds on itself. The more, go ahead.
I have 3 questions now, because we were going to ask you about.
I'm sorry, I babble.
No, now, I mean, you have so much there. Yeah. So we did want to ask you, how did you get to testify before Congress? How did that happen?
back around 2001, there was a congressman, Republican congressman called Dana Rohrabacher, named Damon Rohrabacher, who's an Orange County representative. He was the head of the space science subcommittee, and he wanted to do hearings on the future of space exploration in the 21st century. And he wanted to hear from a number of different people. So they wanted an astronaut, so they got Buzz Aldrin, and they wanted a leading scientist, and so they got Lawrence Krauss from the Case Western Reserve, who also incidentally wrote The Science of Star Trek. They got Wesley Huntress, who's the head of the Planetary Society, and he wanted to also get a science fiction writer. And of all the science fiction writers in the world, they asked me. Why? I don't know. I mean, when I arrived at Congress, I actually went to the aides, and I said, you know, there's 24 guys you could have asked. Why did you ask me? And they said, you were the first person we thought of. Well, that's awfully nice to know. So that was it. They wanted to have a science fiction writer, and I was the first guy they asked.
Wow.
So that was how it happened.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was that was how it happened.
So, and then kind of on the same thing, you know, doing our due diligence, looking you up, we wondered two things about your disc being on the Mars lander. First, how did that happen? And then, did having that experience influence you writing The Emperor of Mars?
Well, I'll go to the second question first. Yes, that directly led to the Emperor of Mars. To tell people what this is about, the background a little bit. When the Mars Phoenix lander was being prepared by NASA to go to Mars, somebody had the idea of putting a disc on it, much like the disc that was put on Voyager 2, The Sounds of Earth, that they put all these different recordings of sounds and everything that were put along with that famous diagram of showing a man and a woman and Earth's position in the solar system and the breakdown of a hydrogen atom and so forth. Somebody thought of doing something of the same thing, but doing it with visions of Mars. Movies, and so there's film clips, there's artwork, and there's a huge cachet of short stories. So they assigned a panel, and I understand one of the people on the panel was the late great Judith Merrill, who is one of the great editors of science fiction, and a number of other people, and they went through seeing what stories had through history that were about Mars. And one of the stories was my story, Live from the Mars Hotel, which was my very first published short story, as it turned out. I mean, that was the weirdest thing. I never would have thought that my very first published piece of science fiction would end up on Mars, but that's what happened. And
So,
many
question. Were all the stories on that disc then about Mars?
Yes, every one of the stories that are on the disc are about Mars. If you look around, there was a commercial product version of that was released, and I mean, it sort of came and went real fast. I mean, I found a copy in a remainder bin in a software store. That's how you know, they never sent me a copy. But that's okay. I was able to buy a copy for $5 in a remainder bin. So I suppose if you look around, you can actually find the thing. It's called Visions of Mars, if you want to go look for it. So anyway, that disc ended up on the Phoenix lander, and it landed on Mars. And I began to wonder if who would find that thing? And I began to wonder, gee, what if we actually, if and when we get people colonizing Mars and somebody finds the Phoenix lander, who's going to find that disk? And that was where the story came from. It's a lot about more than that. It's a pretty deep story, and it was a very intense story for me to write. Um, but that's essentially where that came from, and that's also where the Phoenix Mars disc came from.
Interesting, because you were mentioning the science fiction being real and fantasy not, and that, of course, the character escapes into the fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's right. One of the things about that, when I looked at the disc, I noticed at the contents, I noticed that they were kind of, because it was a historic overview, that a lot of the stories in there were written before people actually went to Mars. And so it reflected the older versions of Mars, like Edgar Rice Burroughs and the John Carter of Mars, the Mars that of Ray Bradbury, that we used to have actual Martians and canals and cities and so forth. Captain Future's Mars was very much that way. And then that all changed more or less in the 1960s when the first probes went out there. And we got to take a look at what Mars was actually like. And, all those great shining illusions just all went poof, vanished, because we discovered that it was, unfortunately, looked a lot more like Arrakis than Barsoom. So, and science fiction changed as a result of that. So when this person reads and he's a very troubled person, he needs escapism like you wouldn't believe. When he reads those stories, naturally he begins to go for the more romantic fantasy version, because that's frankly the more fun, version of these things. And I will grant that to the fantasy. Fantasy it can be for escapism sometimes much better than science fiction in that regard. It can take you away in certain ways. I do read fantasy, but in fact, during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, what I gravitated to unexpectedly, just to get myself away from all that, I picked up sword and sorcery books for the first time in many years, and rediscovered Conan the Barbarian and Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser and all of those characters, because that was as far away as from COVID as I could get. And so that was when I discovered, oh yeah, that's what fantasy's about.
Is it hard to mix your more hard science fiction in with the Captain Future, who's really not science?
Well, because I was updating them, because I'm updating. I mean, it wasn't really hard at all. It was simply taking these characters in these situations and thinking, okay, if Ed Hamilton were alive and well today, he died in the mid 1970s. His wife, incidentally, was Lee Brackett. Lee Brackett was, I consider her to be the first great woman science fiction writer. I think she was the first female to be of great significance in the field. And one of Lee Brackett's accomplishments was that she was also a screenwriter. Her last project that she completed before her death was writing the screen story for The Empire Strikes Back. Her science fiction, she was like the major writer behind old Planet stories. I mean, Planet stories practically belonged to Lee Brackett. I mean, she had a story virtually every issue. So, and her stories were much more akin to fantasy than science fiction. So, when I write my Captain Future stories, I put myself in the idea of, okay, if Hamilton were around today, and maybe Brackett was working with him, how would they be writing a Captain Future story today? And this is how I get it. And this is where I get it. It's not difficult to bridge the two.
Very cool.
Next question.
Okay, well, I have a one, just because, so it seems like you gravitate usually towards outer space
Yes.
and exploration, but you mentioned scuba diving. So I wonder if you've ever
I
done
did
any.
I did one of my novels is called is an undersea novel, Ocean Space. I wanted to write an undersea novel, and so I went out there and boned up on oceanography, and because I figured that I need to get a sense of realism. So for my 40th birthday, my wife and I went down to Dominica, and I spent a week down there uh, learning how to scuba dive. Um, and so that's kind of the way that for at least for a while, that I approach to writing science fiction. It's a very useful way of doing it, and that is to think of it as you, because I also, as I say, I try to learn something from when I'm writing. So I put myself in the mindset is that you kind of you're like you're doing a I approach research as if I'm doing a self-taught university course in a certain subject. And my final project will be the novel that I write. So when I wanted to learn oceanography, when I had to write Ocean Space, I spent 9 months intensively researching oceanography, and then from what I learned from that, I generated this novel. I got interested in time travel when I and decided to write about the Hindenburg disaster. So I spent 9 months reading not only about the time travel, but also about the Hindenburg disaster, and even going to Frankfurt, Germany, and researching, the last days of the crew on the Hindenburg, historic Germany. And out of that came this. The Coyote books, I got interested in the idea of exobiology, and also realistically what the first starship would look like, and what the current ideas on um, the newly emerging exoplanets were. Again, a lot of intense research, and that one turned into a real obsession. The Coyote series ended up spending 11 years on that.
Wow.
So that turned into a PhD.
I
uh,
was gonna say, reading has become a perpetual search for information. You get to be a student forever, you get to be a
yeah,
visionary forever, and you get to travel all over the world. It sounds fabulous.
it is fun. It is fun. Well, I've been traveling a lot less lately, but it is. It's a fun way to make a living.
So when you did the Coyote books, did you envision that as a that's, you call that a mosaic, right?
Yeah, it started. It began. The idea of writing a novel like that was very daunting to me. In fact, I made like two false starts on writing that book before I finally got it right. And the way that I got it right was I decided to trick myself into not, instead of thinking of it as writing a novel, I decided to do it as a series of short stories and then stitch them together so that, you know, I just told myself that I was writing a series of stories. And whenever I thought of myself that I'm writing a novel, I'd be, kind of slap myself and say, no, you're writing short stories. That's what you're actually doing. Yeah, you're writing short stories. And I was selling them to Asimovs. And that worked pretty well for the first two books. And I continued in that particular mosaic style for the next four books after that. Uh, Even after I stopped doing this as a series for Asimovs, because it turned out to be a really great way to write a very complex novel or a series of novels. And if I write the next Coyote book, the working title is Coyote Eclipse. If I write Coyote Eclipse, I'm going to adopt the same methodology. So it's a way of being able to write complex, multi-level novels with a large cast of characters and not be overwhelmed by it. Because I'm not George R. R. Martin. I mean, I can't sit down and write 700-page books. It doesn't come naturally to me. So this is the way I've tried to trick myself into doing that.
So do you, when you are done, do you go back and change things to make it more one?
Yes. Right. Yeah. I go back there and when this is done, I go in there and stitch it together, and sometimes have to do some rewriting, sometimes put in some interstitial material to knit the thing together. The best example of when I did something like this wasn't actually the Coyote books, but the novel that I consider to be my best novel is Arkwright. And Arkwright was originally written as 4 novellas that appeared in Asimov's. But if you look at that, you can, I mean, in fact, if you were actually were to take the novel and then find those stories, and you read the stories and then read the novel, you could see subtle differences between the stories and the novel. And you would certainly see the material that's in between that are like little short stories that stitch the whole thing together. So it's, as I say, it's more like a mosaic. A mosaic is a piece of work with a lot of different pieces that are put together and arranged in a certain form, and they make a larger pattern. That's the way they operate with this.
Did you find taking like the series of short stories for the first novel, did you have to shake up the order, or was the order pretty much the same?
Order was pretty much the same. The only thing that was different, though, and it's kind of peculiar, in Coyote, the 5th story in the series in order was actually the first story that I actually wrote, and that was because I wrote that story for an anthology, a dog books anthology called Space Colonies, and I deliberately did that as a test. I wanted to kind of, it was like a test of concept, as you say. Okay, I said let's write this one short story, and put it out there and see how it works. And if you liked writing it and it works out well, then we'll write the novel. So that 5th story was actually the first one that I read, and that's the one that is changed the most. If you were able to, if you found the story, if you found that anthology, Star Colonies, and you compared it to the story in there, the Boyd Hunt, which the version of the Boyd Hunt that's in Star Colonies to Part 5, the Boyd Hunt, you would see significant differences. The biggest one being changing from 3rd person to 1st person.
Oh wow, yeah.
And so yeah, there's changes that are made along, and also having to take out things to avoid redundancy, because you have to repeat some things. Yes, although some things I deliberately left in there to be redundant, because I want to have this idea that you're seeing the same story done from different viewpoints, and sometimes the viewpoints are conflicting. You're having different views of certain events told from the perspective of different characters. That's deliberate.
So a Rashomon sort of thing.
Exactly.
So did you have, though, the overarching thing when you were starting, or did you just, I mean, you knew the character and...
Well, the way that it always works with me is that, sorry, Jack, I just kicked my dog. I when I work out a novel, I outline it in my head, and I don't begin work on the book until I know where it's going to end, and that sometimes can take a very long time. That's again why I plan well in advance. Um, and so I've got an overall idea where things are going to go by the time I get there. But I allow myself enough leeway to change things, and they always do. I mean, every now and then, I mean, I have to write an outline, and I hate writing outlines. God, I hate writing outlines. So part of the novel process I despise the most is having to write a proposal for a publisher, telling them what the book is going to be about. I'd rather have root canal surgery than do that. Uh, and uh, and whenever I do that, it's always kind of surprising to me later on to pull out that outline after the book is published and to reread my outline, because at some point it completely departs. That the story bears little resemblance to what I wrote in the outline, and that's just simply because it changed as I go along. Sometimes I make changes as I'm writing. It suddenly occurs to me, I get a brainstorm that, wait a second, that's going to look brilliantly if I did that. And I'll put that in there, and it isn't planned, it just had a brainstorm. And I've gotten good at being able to recognize, I think I've gotten good at being able to recognize when it's a good idea and when it's something that I shouldn't do.
Would you write an outline if you didn't have to present it to publishers?
No, absolutely not. The outline that I have an outline, but it's up here. And I prefer to keep it that way.
That's good.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. This is.
You remember you're going to ask me what kind of interesting thing I had to ask.
Well, no, I usually say thank you, and then we say best thing I learned this week. So we didn't forget that.
No, okay, all right. There's because I actually been thinking about that one. Okay, there's a thing I can talk about and a thing I can't talk about.
Well, we want the thing you can't talk about.
Or the thing I can, well, okay, I'll tell you the thing I can talk about. And there's a video that I happened upon while looking at the Weather Channel. And that's where I'm going to point you to see if you can find this, because I looked for it yesterday and it still is linked from the Weather Channel. And it was a brief video that somebody shot of this lady who is scuba diving off the coast of Australia, and apparently there's an octopus, a big octopus that's down there. That, I mean, they know each other. I mean, the octopus recognizes her, and she goes down there periodically and visits. And octopuses are they're intelligent creatures. I mean, that octopus is probably about as smart as Jack, maybe even more so. Certainly smarter than humans when it comes to the ocean. And anyway, this octopus, when she had visited, led her to something that, it actually led this woman across the sea bottom to something they wanted to show her. And when they got there, they discovered that there was something new in the octopus's environment. Somebody had gone down there and put a memorial marker, like a gravestone, down there on the ocean bottom, and it looked sort of like a tombstone. It was a concrete marker that was anchored into the floor. It had two posts that were iron posts on either side with a rope around it to hold it in place. And embedded in one side of it, inside of a waterproof transparent case, was a picture of a man with a dog sitting in his lap. And you actually see the octopus swim around to this thing and raise a tentacle and point, saying, "Look at this," and then scurry away and stood there and looked. And I looked at this and thought, that is one of the most interesting things, because the octopus, obviously knows what a human being is, but it can't possibly know what a dog is. Dogs don't exist in this environment. That that octopus would have no more idea what that dog is than Jack would know what an octopus was. So this was a first contact situation. This is an actual first contact situation in our world. And so that was the thing that I thought of, that I thought this is really very cool. That octopus probably was trying to figure out what that creature was that's sitting in the guy's lap. Probably spent a lot of time, contemplating that question. What is that thing, that person is holding on to? So that's the thing I can talk about.
Okay.
The thing that I can't talk about, but I can hint a little bit about, is something that, well, a little while ago I mentioned I'm working on this book, and I'm in contact with a couple of scientists, and they've been sharing some information with me. And I gotta be real circumspect about this. It'll eventually be in the book. But you remember a couple of years ago that we had that object that went through our solar system called Oumuamua, that people thought might be an alien probe? Well, this looks like another Oumuamua, except it's still around.
In space.
In other words, this may be another probe, another something that's from outside of our solar system. And if it is and there's only three of us that we know about this, although it could be other people know about it, we don't know. But it's just the three of us have been looking at this information, and the more we look at it, the more it looks artificial in origin. And if it is what we kind of think, it could be also be completely natural in origin, and we're fooling ourselves. We tell ourselves that. We remind ourselves the fact that this could be something that is completely natural and has an interesting but nonetheless natural origin behind it. But if it is something that is of extraterrestrial origin, then it is potentially evidence that we're not alone in the solar system.
Or you think it would be an intentional probe?
Yes.
Is this a SETI thing? I noticed you have some.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I feel like I'm playing 20 questions.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it is. I mean, you could, how, you actually, is it bigger than a bread box? Is it smaller than a Washington Monument? We could keep on going with this. The earmarks to us look like it is that it is of alien origin, that it's artificial, and it not only that, but the difference of Oumuamua passed through the solar system. It came in and encircled the sun and went out the other way, accelerating as it left. And if you want to read a really fascinating book on this, one of the things I've read lately, is one of the best books that I've read, is a book called Extraterrestrial by Avi Loeb. And that was the Harvard physicist who discovered this thing. And he makes the case for it not being an asteroid or comet relic, but an actual, what they believe is that it was a light sail. And he makes the case for it, and it's a pretty damn convincing case. It's not the same thing, but it's on the same lines.
Wow.
But the difference is that Oumuamua is already out of our solar system. We believe this thing is still here.
You say you believe, but you're not sure.
We believe, yeah, we're not 100% certain, but we think that we're reasonably certain that it's still around.
Wow.
But that's all I can talk about.
Elizabeth, I don't know if we can top those or
No.
even try.
Well, I tell you, it's going into this story. It's the sequel.
Awesome.
It's going into the story that I'm writing now, The Hunt for Lemuria 7, which is the sequel to Lemuria 7 is Missing. I've just finished a rough draft of this thing. My two colleagues are vetting the manuscript right now for science errors and things like that.
Nice.
Next week or so, I'm going to write the final draft and send it off to Asimov's. So, and if pending that Asimov's takes it and it's published, you'll see it. I don't know, sometime, and then you'll see what we're talking about.
Great. And don't forget, check the Facebook page. So maybe you'll write, it's out, it's out.
Yes, I will. Of course, the Facebook page will when it comes out. As always, I'll mention it there.
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm topping this, probably not. But this was the best thing I learned this week, which is researchers have harnessed the bacterium that is responsible for kombucha's fermenting and to produce a textile without environmentally damaging dyes. And they actually engineered this bacterium to produce sheets of cellulose that are colored with melanin, the pigment that colors our hair and skin,
Yeah, right.
and everything, to give it a dark, so they can make like a dark fake leather out of this. And they also gave the bacteria a protein that responds to blue light. And so that can create patterns to create this fake leather.
Wow.
So we're going to actually have glow in the dark leather.
What?
Do we actually have fluorescent leather?
It's a fake leather. It's like a vegan leather.
Fake leather. But that's not Naugahyde. I mean, that's interesting.
But it's produced organically. It's the cellulose, but it's with its response to blue light, so you can make patterns on it.
Oh, that would be really good. I'd like to have a jacket like that. That would be cool.
So
Okay. All right, and mine is, let's see if I can get this. I found this link that I was looking, I'm always looking for good things because I always forget that there are good things. And I found this link with this Australian blind marsupial mole that the Indigenous rangers in the desert of Western Australia, we're keeping it Australian, found, and they have a picture of it, and they only find them a few times a decade. But then even cooler, they showed a couple of other animals from that area, and one of them is a thorny desert lizard, devil lizard, excuse me, devil, and its entire body is spiky. It looks like something made out of I don't know, like little pieces of plastic, and it looks like an animated thorn bush or a cactus or something. And I learned a new word, its skin is hydrophilic, meaning that if its body touches moisture, it can absorb it into its body without drinking it. And it's so desert animal. And then there's also, the last thing there is a frog that can go 5 years without drinking. It has all this water, and they said in this little article, which we'll put a link to, that Aborigines will dig them up, sometimes squeeze them and drink the water out of the frog, and then they'll put them back into where they found them, or bring them to a watering hole because they might die in the next dry season if they don't regain their lost water. So I just thought that was cool.
Wow.
So I'm going to stick a link to that article.
It also kind of gives you crazy. I mean, just get this crazy idea, the vision of somebody Aborigine taking a frog and
I know.
squeezing at the water out of it, getting a drink out of it. Frog water.
frog water, yeah, the new latest thing. We'll be seeing it in their stores soon.
Yeah, frog beer.
So, but I really recommend you look at the picture of the devil lizard, because it's, both Elizabeth and I are huge animal geeks. We've done animal stuff our whole lives, and it's always amazing how many animals I still have never seen or know anything about. So.
Oh, it is incredible, especially in Australia.
Yeah, that'd be one of the places I'd like to go because of the range of the animals that are there, that evolved in a different way in an isolated environment that we don't find elsewhere.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
different.
You need to write a book, Alan, to have a reason to go to Australia to do that.
Yeah, please, somebody invite me to an Australian science fiction convention. That's how I do most of my travel. Is that somebody? That's one of the nice things about being a science fiction writer is that people invite you to go to these places. I mean, I've been to China twice, and not on my own dime.
Nice, very nice.
That's great.
Well, this has been so much fun having a chance to talk to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank
This has
you.
been a lot of
Thank you.
fun.
Oh, yeah, there's just, I mean, we have to have you back sometime because there's so much we didn't even get to talk about.
Please,
Um,
please do.
and
Lovely.
yeah, thank you so much. And Andrea, you want to tell
Well,
about?
thank you, Maria Korolov and Alex Korolov. Alex edits, and Maria is our producer. And we want to say, check out MetaStellar. We do, I'm going to say I'm stumbling here. We do horror, science fiction, and fantasy original stories. We also do reprints, and you can find everything listed below. I mean, well, the magazine website is below, and you can check it out. And go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, and
Tell us
while
about your
you're on
research.
MetaStellar, they are serializing my novel, Gods and Monsters. It comes out every week, a new episode in print, and I also narrate it, so you can listen to sections too.
It's fabulous. Thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye, Alan.
Are we out? Okay.